Today is the 1st of June, and she noticed it again. That quiet moment when her husband looked at her but didn't see her. No warmth in his eyes. No lingering gaze that once used to light up when she walked into the room. Just the blank, routine glance of a man buried in his own world. It didn't start with a fight. No slamming doors, no harsh words, no storm. It started with silence. And silence, Eleanor had come to learn, was much more frightening. What happens when the person you built a life with begins to look at you like a stranger? Not because he wants to, but because something in his heart has dimmed. Archangel Michael says this isn't the end of love. But to restore it, you must see the truth. You must understand what's truly happening in the invisible realm of your marriage. Eleanor is 67, a Christian woman from a quiet town in Kentucky. She's been married to Harold for 42 years. Their story began in a Baptist church on a rainy spring day. She remembers how his hand trembled when he passed her the hymnal. He said she looked like the angel who visited him in a dream. Back then, they prayed together at sunrise, cooked in harmony, danced in the kitchen with the windows open, and kissed each other goodnight without fail. They were a living testimony of God's union. But now, the house still stands. The chairs still creak the same way. The coffee still brews at 6 a.m. Yet something sacred feels broken. Harold no longer compliments her. No more soft touches across the table. No more spontaneous walks or, "You're still the one," whispers in her ear. She catches him staring into the distance during dinner. Detached, distant, diminished. He still wears the ring. But the man who once looked at her with the eyes of a man in love now looks through her. One night, she sat on the edge of the bed while he snored beside her. She whispered softly into the stillness, "God, am I invisible now?" And in that aching moment, she remembered the verse from Isaiah 46:4. "I am he who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you." Tears streamed down her cheeks. Because deep down, she feared the truth. That love had an expiration date. But then, something unusual happened. That same night, Eleanor had a dream. A radiant figure appeared, cloaked in blue fire, with eyes that pierced straight through sorrow. He didn't speak at first. He only held out his hand and placed it gently on her shoulder. Then, in a voice that echoed like a cathedral bell, he said, "The bond isn't broken, but the gaze must be reclaimed." She woke up gasping, hand on her heart, drenched in both sweat and a strange warmth. She knew. She had just been visited by Archangel Michael, and he had more to say. But the message wouldn't be easy. Because healing love, real love, the kind that lasts decades, requires revelation. It's not just about your spouse looking at you differently. It's about you looking at yourself differently first. Because somewhere along the way, you stop seeing yourself too. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table the next morning, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee. But her heart was burning. She couldn't shake the dream. The weight of the angel's words echoed louder than the silence of her home. The bond isn't broken, but the gaze must be reclaimed. What did that mean? She thought about the years she had spent giving everything: her youth, her body, her forgiveness, her patience, her prayers to this marriage. She remembered the joy of watching their children grow up, the shared grief of burying Harold's mother, the small anniversary dinners where they barely had money but overflowed with laughter. And now, she wondered, why does he look at her like a chore? Why does love fade, even when faith remains? This isn't just Eleanor's story. This is your story. You who feel abandoned inside a home you help build. You who serve and sacrifice but feel unseen. You who pray, love, endure, but still ask, why does he not choose me anymore? And Archangel Michael's whisper arrives again. It is not your body that he has forgotten. It is the voice of heaven inside you he can no longer hear. Because sometimes love doesn't die, it just gets buried beneath years of stress, health problems, disappointments, and unresolved emotions. And here is the painful truth. When one person in a marriage stops seeing the divine in the other, the heart closes its windows. Eleanor opened her Bible and searched for answers. She found Psalm 147:3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. But she didn't just want to be healed. She wanted to be seen again. And that's when the second part of the message arrived this time, in the form of a memory. 20 years ago, Harold had told her, "You're the only woman I've ever met who makes me feel close to God just by the way you laugh." And she realized something profound. The Eleanor that inspired his love had not disappeared. She had just hidden herself under fatigue, under responsibilities, under shame about aging, under the fear that being a faithful wife was no longer enough. But that woman, the one who laughed with heaven in her lungs, she was still inside her, waiting to be called forward again. Archangel Michael's system of divine reconnection is simple, but powerful. It begins with the sacred truth. You are not your wrinkles. You are not your silence. You are not your sadness. You are still the vessel of God's presence that first drew him in. And if you want to be seen again, you must speak with heaven's language once more. Start by reclaiming your radiance, not from makeup, but from memory. Remember who you were when you were first chosen, not just by Him, but by God. Because when you carry the presence of the Holy Spirit in your words, even a wandering heart will be drawn back to you. It's not manipulation, it's remembrance. Later that night, Eleanor stood at the bathroom mirror. She looked into her own eyes for the first time in years, and she whispered, "I am still the woman God designed to be loved, not begged for, not pitied, but loved with fire, faith, and forever." And the next morning, something changed. Harold reached across the table, touched her hand, looked her in the eyes, and asked, "Are you all right, Elle?" She smiled, because heaven had started to open his gaze again. But there was more work to do, more steps to awaken what had fallen asleep. And Michael's next instruction would unlock the second gate of love's return. The hand that reached across the table was the same one that once held hers at the altar. But this time, it trembled slightly. Harold's eyes didn't hold the full fire of yesterday's love, but they held something else. A flicker, a question, a beginning. And Eleanor knew it wasn't just his change. It was hers. That night in prayer, she asked Archangel Michael, "What am I supposed to do now? He noticed me. But is that enough?" The answer came clearly. Love isn't restored through words. It's rebuilt through presence. And that was the next lesson in Michael's divine reconnection system, the law of sacred presence. You see, when we stop being present, we become echoes in our own home. We walk past each other like ghosts. We fill the silence with chores. We say good night without ever really looking. Eleanor remembered how she used to greet Harold at the door with a smile and warm hands. Now, she'd often stay seated, tired, already bracing for a cold night. It wasn't her fault. She was weary. Her knees ached. Her body had changed. Her emotions felt used up. But Michael reminded her of something sacred. Presence heals where words fail. Not dramatic speeches. Not begging. Not manipulation. Just simple, holy presence. The way Jesus sat beside the lonely. The way Mary lingered at the foot of the cross. So Eleanor did something small. She waited by the door when Harold came home. She placed one hand on his arm and said, "I'm glad you're here." He paused, surprised. She didn't expect a grand response, but he nodded. His shoulders softened. He didn't pull away. The next evening, she sat beside him on the couch, not saying much, but she was close. Not scrolling, not folding laundry, just close. It was awkward at first, but slowly she saw something returning. Not romance yet, but recognition. The way his eyes stayed on her face a few seconds longer. The way he reached for the blanket and covered her legs. The way he sighed like a man settling into something familiar and safe. Michael calls this phase heart heat. It's the warmth that grows when a soul dares to stay present, to stay tender, to stay unguarded. The modern world teaches us to chase passion, but heaven teaches us to plant presence, because presence invites the Holy Spirit into the room. And once the Spirit enters, so does restoration. Eleanor began leaving handwritten notes in Harold's lunch. Simple verses, reminders, a joke or two from their early days. She didn't know if he even read them at first, until one night he came to bed late and slipped a folded napkin on her nightstand. It said, "Thanks for Psalm 23 today. Felt like you were praying over me. H." She cried softly in the dark, not because it was poetic, but because it was proof. Presence was working. This is what Archangel Michael wants you to understand. You don't need to beg for love. You need to become love again. You don't need to scream to be heard. You need to let your spirit speak louder than your silence. And when you do, even the coldest heart can remember the warmth of the one they once adored. There's a moment in every healing story when the silence no longer feels threatening. It feels sacred. That's where Eleanor and Harold had arrived. Not at fireworks, not at full restoration, but at stillness that held possibility. Each evening, Eleanor would light a candle beside their wedding photo and whisper a single line of prayer. "Lord, help us find what we lost." And that's when Archangel Michael delivered the third lesson. Not about emotion, not about attention, but about something most marriages forget with time: admiration. The third law of the divine reconnection system is called the mirror of honor. Michael's message was clear. People begin to see others as sacred again, only when they feel sacred in their presence. Think of how often do we remind the ones we love that they're still valuable? We thank the waitress, we compliment strangers at church, but the one who cooks beside us, sleeps beside us, we forget to see them. Harold had once told Eleanor, "I don't need the world to cheer for me if you believe in me." But as the years went on, Eleanor had stopped saying what she thought he already knew. And so had he. The marriage hadn't fallen apart. It had quietly emptied of appreciation. So Eleanor began a new ritual. Each morning, she wrote down one thing she admired about Harold: his steadiness, the way he never missed a Sunday service, the way he always fixed the wobbly cabinet no one else noticed. And then she said it out loud, not with fanfare, not with expectation, just a simple moment of seeing him again. At first, Harold blinked, unsure. He didn't know how to receive it. But by the third day, he responded, "You really still notice that?" She smiled. "I never stopped. I just stopped saying it." And that was when the soil of their love began to soften again. Because honor resurrects admiration. Michael urges all who feel invisible to do this one sacred thing: speak admiration before speaking frustration. Why? Because the human heart was designed to open in safety. When a man feels admired, he no longer hides. When a woman feels seen, she no longer shields. When both feel holy in each other's gaze, the marriage becomes a sanctuary again. One evening, Harold turned to Eleanor and said, "I've been praying again." Her eyes widened. He hadn't said that in years. He continued, "You're helping me remember who I used to be. I lost it somewhere along the way." Eleanor didn't cry. She simply held his hand. Because the voice of love doesn't always return with poetry. Sometimes it comes back in pieces, one humble confession at a time. Here's your action step today. Choose one thing to admire out loud. Not about looks, not about the past, but about something true now. Honor is holy, and when it's spoken, it becomes a mirror that helps your spouse see what God sees in them. Do this consistently, and the atmosphere of your home will shift. Because admiration waters love, and love when watered blooms again. Eleanor sat beside Harold on the porch. The wind carried the scent of lilacs. A soundless comfort wrapped around them, deeper than any music. And Harold, once so distant, turned to her with eyes that remembered. "You never gave up on me," he said softly. She placed her hand over his heart. "I couldn't. God didn't give up on us either." This is the fruit of the divine reconnection system. Not just feeling seen again, but becoming the one who helps another remember their worth in God's eyes. Archangel Michael says this is the highest work of love. Not perfection, not passion that burns every day, but love that stays heaven when the fire dims. Love that rebuilds, not by fixing, but by reminding. And now, it's your turn. Because if you're listening to this, chances are, your spouse no longer looks at you the same. The sparkle you once saw in their eyes has dulled. The hand you used to hold now feels hesitant, distant. But hear this. This is not the end of love. This is the beginning of awakening. Let's summarize Michael's divine reconnection system. The gaze must be reclaimed. Love fades when we stop seeing each other. Healing begins with the courage to look again with gentleness and faith. The law of sacred presence. Words don't always heal. Presence does. Stay near. Stay tender. Stay spiritually awake beside the one you once prayed for. The mirror of honor. Admiration is oxygen for love. Speak it often. Speak it sincerely. Speak it before complaint can choke your connection. These steps aren't quick fixes. They are sacred disciplines. And here's your final action step. Every morning for the next 7 days, look your spouse in the eye and speak one word of honor, one memory of love, and one simple prayer. Even if they say nothing, even if they look away, even if their heart is cold, because heaven responds to consistent love, not loud love, not perfect love, but faithful love. One evening, Eleanor found an old photo album tucked in the back of the closet. She brought it to Harold. They sat cross-legged on the living room floor like teenagers, laughing, weeping, remembering. She pointed at a photo from their honeymoon, Harold kissing her temple. "I missed that," she whispered. Harold turned to her and said, "I think I can still kiss you like that." And he did. Not because they'd gone back in time, but because time had bowed to something greater, a love that refused to leave. Before this story ends, Michael has one more question for you. Will you be the one who stays when everything else pulls away? Because when you stay, when you choose tenderness over retreat, prayer over bitterness, and honor over apathy, you become the miracle in your marriage. You become the one your spouse sees again. And in that seeing, love returns.